Hello there and welcome. Today we're going to continue with our trivia series. Before we start, I just want to remind you that most of you are not subscribed to the channel, so please consider subscribing. It will support me a lot and it will also notify you when new episodes and new content comes out. In the previous episode, we created our main menu scene. We made sure that all the UI is set up, that we can actually move from scene to scene by clicking on these buttons. Today we want to focus on the game scene, so let's double click on the game scene and open it over here. For this scene, I'm not going to provide you the UI, so we're going to create it together, and this is a good opportunity for you to practice a bit on creating the UI. Again, all the UI that I'm doing in this game is optional. You should probably have your own UI with your own theme, your own colors. So we're going to create our background UI image, and it will automatically create the canvas and the event system. This is important. Without the event system, the clicking on the buttons will not work. Now we're going to select the image and we're going to rename it to background. We're going to click on the canvas and we're going to make sure that the scale mode is scale with screen size. We're also going to change this to full HD, but portrait mode. And we're going to do this for every canvas, for every scene. So I'm not going to really explain this each time. Just make sure that you're doing this. I'm going to show you, but this is something we do for each scene just to make sure that the screen scales correctly on different devices and it keeps this aspect ratio. Then we're going to click on the background. We're going to click over here and we're going to hold Alt and we're going to click on this part over here and it will expand the entire background to be anchored to the edges of the scene. We can see the anchors over here. Now we're going to add the actual text field that will display the question for the player. So we're going to right click on the background. We're going to select UI Text Mesh Pro and we're going to again click here, Alt Expand, just to make sure that the anchors are set. And we're going to move the anchors and drag them to be about 35% of the height. And then we're going to also change the size of it to fit the anchors. So the anchors basically hold the UI. So if we change the screens, we move around and play with the aspect ratio, it will still keep its shape. So this is important. You want to make sure that the anchors are always anchoring the size of the UI. Now we also want to create the buttons that will be used for the answers. So we're going to right click on the background, we're going to create an empty object and we're going to name it button area. Then we're going to again click over here, expand it, but this time we're going to make sure that it goes and sits exactly at the end of the text area, and we're going to make sure the anchors are at about 65%. So we have 65% of the height for the buttons and 35% of the height for the question text. Okay, so this is 35% and this is 65%. Now we're going to add a button inside. We're going to right click button, but we want to make sure that all of these buttons have the same scale and that they're organized one on top of the other. So we're going to click on the button area and we're going to add a component named vertical layout group. You can just search for it, vertical layout group. And this will basically make sure that all the buttons are organized correctly. You can play around with the settings. So we're going to select all of these and it will basically expand the child to the width and the height. Now we only have one button, so it takes up the entire area. But as soon as I add another button, so I'm going to Control D, duplicate the button, it's going to add another button. It will automatically make it half of the size, and then I'm going to add another button and another button. So we want to have 4 buttons, and we can see that this vertical layout group automatically changed the size of these buttons. Of course, we can also play around with the spacing. So we're going to make sure that we have some spaces, but again, you can play around with the UI, so we can create some spacing between them by changing the spacing. We can also click over here and have some padding, so we can add some padding to the left, let's say 6, and to the right, and to the top, and to the bottom. And again, you can play around with this. Now we want to rename these. And again, let's just decorate this a bit because I'm not going to provide you the UI. So let's make sure that we have a color for the background. Let's make it this color. This is the color that I'm using. If you want to take it, just copy this thing over here and paste it into your color picker. So this is the code. Then for the buttons, we're going to select all the buttons and we're going to use the same UI we used in the main menu. So we click over here, circle. We have this button circle 250, and we're also going to change the color to this yellow. So again, you can copy the code over here. So we're going to have these buttons. Then we're also going to have our text and we're going to make sure that it's in the middle. So we're going to align it to the center. And we're also going to give it a color. So we're going to use the same yellow color. You can create swatches. So you can always have these colors in this project and you don't have to input the code each time. You simply click over here and it saves the color. Okay, so you can see it. I click on it and then it will add the color for you to use it in this project. So we're going to make the text a bit bigger. And again, this can be a long question, so don't make it too big. Let's say 80 or even 70. Let's change it to bold and let's change the font to be Roboto because this is the font that we're going to use for this app. Then let's say if we have a long question, we want to make sure that there are some paddings. So we're going to click over here, extra settings, and we're going to create some paddings. So maybe 36 or even more, 60, and to the right, 60. So the question will be confined to this area over here. Now we're going to delete this. We're going to add some small characters just to know that we have something over here. Then for the buttons, we're going to expand all of these text components and we're going to click on one, hold Control, click on the other one, still hold Control, and then select all of them. We're going to increase the size of the font a bit. And again, these will be answers, so they will also be long sometimes. Let's keep it at 70. Let's change the font, and we're going to use a color. So we're going to use this darker gray color. You can see the code over here. And we can make it bold, we can keep it like this, it doesn't really matter. Next, we want to create the UI manager for this game scene. And this will basically control the different buttons, but will also help us to display the question. It will help us to display the timer when we get a timer. It will help us to display the lives. So we're going to collapse this. We're going to create a new empty object and name it UI manager. We're going to create a script with the same name. Now we want to make this UI manager into a singleton, and basically means that it will be a component that exists in our game, that there's only one of it. Well, actually one of it in this scene. And this will also allow us to reference methods from this script without actually having a reference to this script. So we're going to use this public static UI manager instance. We can also do get set. And in order to make sure that we don't have more instances, we're going to say private void awake if instance is null, then instance is this, else destroy this instance. And this is just a very generic way to create a singleton. You're going to see it in different scripts and different places and different projects. So this is the way we create a singleton. Now, because we don't want this to get in our way, we're going to create a region to hide this area. So we're going to use this number sign region, and then we're going to give it some kind of name, singleton, and we're going to end the region over here. Again, this sign and region. And now what we can do is basically click over here and collapse this entire section into the singleton. And now we are not going to see it and it's not going to get in our way. Now we want to add a few fields. We can add them above the singleton or under it. It doesn't really matter. So public text mesh pro UGUI question text, and this will be the text for the question. And we also want to have a public array of buttons. And if you can't find this component, make sure you first have this TM Pro namespace, and then you're going to be able to find it. So again, if you don't know how to add namespaces, you simply type in using TM Pro and you're going to find it. And this will be available only if you imported TextMesh Pro, but we already talked about that we need to use TextMesh Pro for this project. Now we're going to have a method to initialize the buttons. So basically we're going to drag all the buttons into this array, but we also need to add on-click listeners to these buttons. So we're going to have a method over here, private void initialize buttons. We're simply going to loop over all the buttons and set on-click listeners. So we still don't have this method, so we're going to generate it. Again, you can simply create this method over here, but a faster way will be to hover over it and then show potential fixes and generate method. So now we have this method, and basically what we do over here is that we initialize the buttons. We go over this array of buttons, and for each button we set an on-click listener. So when we click on this button, it's basically going to run this method with the index of the button. And this way we can know if we answered the correct answer or if we answered the wrong answer. And we want to call this method at the beginning of the scene, so when the scene is just started. So we are going to expand the singleton and we're going to call this method over here. And we place it inside the await because we want to make sure that these buttons are initialized as soon as the scene is loaded. So if we click on the button very fast, it will already work and it will respond to the click. Now we can collapse this again. Now inside this method, what we want to do is basically call a method from another manager that we're going to have. We still don't have this manager, but we're going to create it. So for now, let's have question manager instance, and this will also be a singleton, and we're going to have a method inside named submit answer, and we're going to provide it with the index. Now, as I told you, we still don't have this singleton, so for now, in order to not get this error, we're going to comment this out, and we're going to uncomment this when we create the singleton a bit later. Now, before we continue with the methods, we want to create a class for our question. So each question will have its own answers, its own text, and its own correct answer index. So this way we can basically have some kind of class that will hold all of this data. So we're going to create this script. We're going to go back to the Unity editor. We're going to create a new script and we're going to name it question. And inside we're going to have a few fields. We're going to have a public string question text. We're going to have a public string array of answers. We're going to have a public int correct answer index. And we also want to have some kind of utility method that is going to check if the answer is correct. So public bool is correct, and it will basically receive an integer for the index, and it will check if this is the index, if this is the correct index. So answer index. So this is what we need inside our question class. We're also going to make it a data class, so we don't need this mono behavior. And we're also going to make it serializable, system serializable. This is especially important if we want to see it in the inspector. Although it's public, we're not going to see it because it's a data class, so we need to make sure it's serializable. Now we're going to open our UI manager once again, and we're going to create a method to display the question. So inside this method, we're simply receiving a question from another part of the code, and then we're going to display this question text into the UI. So we're basically going to display it over here. And then we're also going to set up the buttons. So we're going to check for the length of this array of buttons, and for each button, we're going to set a different answer. So if this question has 4 answers, we're going to create 4 buttons. We're basically going to make sure that 4 of these buttons are enabled. But if we only have 3 answers, then we're going to disable the 4th button. And this basically helps us to have more customization to our game. So for example, maybe you're not interested in 4 buttons, maybe you just want 3 buttons. Then you can simply add 3 answers into your question, and it will simply display 3 buttons instead of 4. So this is an option you have, but of course, if you want to have 4 buttons, then it will simply create and it will show 4 buttons. Now we also want to unselect the buttons, because when we click on a button, it will stay clicked, and then when we go to the next question, the button will still be selected. So we don't want this to happen, so we're going to unselect all buttons every new question. So we're going to generate this method, and over here we're simply going to make sure that this code runs. So it goes like this: event system. So all we do inside this method is check if we have an event system, and we should have an event system, and then it will simply set the selected game object to be null, and it means that if we have a button that is selected, it will unselect it. So every new question, all of these buttons will be unselected, and everything will look nice. And now we're basically done with this part of the code. Later we're going to add a few more things. Let's save the script, and now we're going to drag the references. So we're going to click on the UI manager, and over here we can see that we need a reference to the question text, to this text field over here. So we're going to expand the canvas, and we're going to drag our, let's also rename it to question text, and we're going to click on the UI manager and drag this question text into this slot. And we also want a reference for these buttons, so we're simply going to collapse them. We're going to select all of these buttons, and now this will disappear. So we can click on it again, and we can lock it over here. And now we can select them and drag them into this array. So now we have a reference to these buttons. And don't forget to unlock it again. And now we have these references. Now if we run the game, it will obviously not work because we still don't have any questions, right? We did not create any questions, any answers. So it will not display anything on the UI. This is something we're going to do in the next episode. So thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing. It will help me a lot. Please leave a like. It will help with the algorithm. And I'll see you in the next episode.